The television was still flickering with emergency broadcasts when Priscilla found Elvis Presley sobbing in the bathroom at Graceland, his face buried in his hands like a child who had lost everything. November 22nd, 1963, 2:30 p.m. Central Time. The news had broken just minutes earlier. President John F. Kennedy had been shot in Dallas. America was reeling from the incomprehensible reality that their young, charismatic leader might be dying in a Texas hospital. But for Elvis Presley, the news hit with a personal devastation that surprised even those closest to him. The man who had seemed invincible on stage, who had faced down critics, controversies, and the pressures of unprecedented fame, was completely undone by the shooting of a president he had never met but deeply admired. Priscilla had been living at Graceland for nearly a year, having moved from Germany to be with Elvis when she turned 17. She had seen him in every possible mood, jubilant after successful recording sessions, frustrated with movie scripts he didn't respect, tender during quiet moments when the world wasn't watching, but she had never seen him cry. Not once. Elvis had always projected strength, even in private moments. He was the provider, the protector, the one who solved problems and carried burdens for everyone around him. Vulnerability, especially the kind that involved tears, seemed as foreign to Elvis as failure. That afternoon changed everything Priscilla thought she knew about the man she loved. The first sign that something was wrong came during lunch. Elvis had been unusually quiet, picking at his food while the television played in the background. The programming had been interrupted repeatedly with updates from Dallas, but initially the reports were confusing, contradictory. A president had been shot, but details were scarce. Then came Walter Cronkite's voice, steady and grave, cutting through the uncertainty with words that would be seared into American memory forever. From Dallas, Texas, the flash apparently official. President Kennedy died at 1 p.m. Central Standard Time, 2 o'clock Eastern Standard Time, some 38 minutes ago. Elvis's fork clattered against his plate. The sound echoed through the dining room at Graceland like a gunshot. "No," he whispered, his voice barely audible. "No, that can't be right." Priscilla watched Elvis's face cycle through disbelief, confusion, and something approaching panic. This wasn't the controlled, measured response she had expected from someone who had met presidents who moved in circles of power and influence. This was the reaction of a man who had just witnessed the destruction of something he held sacred. Without a word, Elvis stood up from the table and walked toward the stairs leading to their bedroom. His movements were mechanical, like someone sleepwalking through a nightmare. Priscilla followed at a distance, unsure whether to give him space or offer comfort. She found him sitting on the edge of their bed, staring at the small television they kept in the bedroom, watching the same terrible footage play over and over again. The limousine in Dallas. The chaos. The desperate race to Parkland Hospital. The confirmation of what seemed impossible. "Elvis?" Priscilla said softly. "Are you okay?" He didn't respond immediately. When he finally spoke, his voice was thick with emotion she had never heard before. "He was supposed to change everything, Priscilla. He was supposed to make things better for people like us." "People like us?" Elvis turned to look at her, and for the first time she saw tears forming in his eyes. Poor people. People who grew up with nothing. People who weren't supposed to amount to anything. His voice cracked slightly. He understood what it was like to be underestimated. What Priscilla didn't know was that Elvis's connection to John F. Kennedy ran deeper than political admiration. It was personal, rooted in a conversation that had taken place 3 years earlier, when Elvis was serving in the army in Germany. Bad Nauheim, Germany. Elvis had been following the presidential election with unusual interest for someone who had never been particularly political. But there was something about Kennedy that captured his imagination. The youth, the charisma, the sense that America was ready for something different. When Kennedy won the election, Elvis had written a letter that he never sent, congratulating the new president and expressing his hope that the country would finally address the poverty and inequality that Elvis had experienced firsthand growing up in Mississippi and Memphis. The letter, which Priscilla would find years later among Elvis's personal papers, revealed thoughts and feelings that Elvis rarely shared publicly. "Mr. President, I know you don't know me personally, but I wanted to tell you how much hope your victory has given to people like me, who grew up poor in the South. You make us believe that anyone can rise above their circumstances if they work hard enough and care enough about helping others. I pray that God will guide you as you try to make life better for all Americans, especially those who need help the most." Elvis had written the letter in longhand, then sealed it in an envelope that he carried with him for months before finally deciding not to send it. The idea of a rock and roll singer offering political commentary to the President of the United States seemed presumptuous, even to someone as famous as Elvis. But the letter revealed the depth of Elvis's investment in Kennedy's presidency. His belief that the young president represented something new and hopeful in American politics. Now that hope was lying in a hospital in Dallas and Elvis was struggling to process the magnitude of the loss. 20 minutes after leaving the dining room, Elvis excused himself and walked into their private bathroom, closing the door behind him. Priscilla assumed he needed privacy to collect himself, to process the news the way men of his generation had been taught to handle crisis, quietly, privately, without burdening others. She was folding laundry in their bedroom when she heard the sound that would forever change how she saw Elvis. Sobbing. Deep, broken, uncontrolled crying that seemed to come from a place of pain she had never known existed in him. Priscilla stood frozen outside the bathroom door, unsure whether to knock, to enter, or to give him the privacy he clearly needed. The crying continued for several minutes, not the brief manly tears she might have expected, but the kind of weeping that suggested something fundamental had been broken. Finally, she knocked softly. "Elvis, can I come in?" There was a pause, then the sound of water running, Elvis trying to compose himself. "Just give me a minute, honey." But when he emerged from the bathroom 5 minutes later, his face was still red and swollen from crying. There was no hiding what had happened, no pretending that the strongest man in her world hadn't just been completely undone by grief. They sat together on their bed, watching the news coverage in silence. Periodically, Elvis would shake his head or make soft sounds of disbelief, but mostly he just stared at the television with an expression of profound loss. Around 6 p.m., the phone began ringing. Colonel Parker, RCA executives, movie studio representatives, all calling to discuss how Elvis should respond to the national tragedy. Should he cancel upcoming recording sessions? Should he make a public statement? Should he perform at any memorial events? Elvis answered none of the calls. Instead, he asked Jerry Schilling to tell everyone that he would not be available for the rest of the day. That evening, as reports continued to flood in from Dallas, Elvis did something that revealed yet another layer of his emotional response to Kennedy's death. He walked to the piano in Graceland's music room and began playing a deeply spiritual song that had always brought him comfort during difficult times. But instead of his usual powerful delivery, Elvis sang the song as a whispered prayer, his voice breaking repeatedly as he struggled through lyrics about finding strength in faith during dark moments. Priscilla listened from the doorway, finally beginning to understand that Elvis's grief wasn't just about politics or even about the loss of a president. It was about the death of hope, the destruction of a future that had seemed bright with possibility. "He represented everything I wanted America to be," Elvis said later that night, as they lay in bed in the darkness. "Young, brave, willing to fight for people who couldn't fight for themselves. When I was growing up poor in Mississippi, I never thought someone like me could make a difference in the world. But Kennedy made me believe that ordinary people could do extraordinary things." Priscilla reached for his hand in the darkness. "You do make a difference, Elvis. You make people happy. You bring joy to millions of people." "Entertainment isn't the same thing as leadership, Priscilla. Kennedy was trying to change the world. I just sing songs." The conversation revealed something about Elvis that would influence the rest of his career. A deep desire to use his fame for purposes beyond entertainment. A longing to contribute to social progress that he rarely expressed publicly but that motivated many of his private actions. Over the following days, as America moved through the rituals of national mourning, Elvis remained largely secluded at Graceland. He watched the funeral proceedings with the same intense focus he brought to learning new songs, studying every detail of the ceremony as if trying to understand how a nation says goodbye to broken dreams. The image that affected him most deeply was John F. Kennedy Jr., not yet 3 years old, saluting his father's coffin. Elvis watched the footage over and over, tears streaming down his face each time. "That little boy will grow up without his daddy because of hate," Elvis said to Priscilla. "That's what hate does. It takes away the people we need most." The comment revealed another layer of Elvis's response to Kennedy's assassination. For someone who had experienced his own share of hatred and criticism, who had been called everything from a corrupter of youth to a threat to American values, Kennedy's death felt like confirmation of his worst fears about human nature. But it also strengthened his resolve to use his platform differently. Within a month of Kennedy's death, Elvis made several decisions that surprised those around him. He began quietly contributing to civil rights organizations, something he had never done before. He started visiting children's hospitals without publicity, spending time with young patients who needed hope more than entertainment. Most significantly, He began insisting that his concerts include what he called healing music, gospel songs, and spiritual numbers that addressed pain, loss, and the search for meaning in difficult times. "People come to my shows to forget their troubles," he told Priscilla. "But maybe sometimes they need to remember that troubles can make us stronger, that we can get through anything if we help each other." The change in Elvis's worldview was subtle but profound. The man who had once focused primarily on entertaining audiences began thinking more deeply about inspiring them, about using his voice to provide comfort during dark times rather than simply diversion from them. Priscilla noticed that Elvis started reading more seriously, books about philosophy, religion, and social issues that he had previously ignored. He began having longer, more thoughtful conversations with friends about the state of the world, about responsibility, about what it meant to be someone with influence and platform. The JFK assassination had shattered Elvis's innocence about American politics and society, but it had also awakened something deeper in him, a sense of purpose that went beyond personal success. Years later, when Elvis recorded "If I Can Dream," his powerful anthem about social justice and unity, many people assumed it was inspired by the civil rights movement or the social upheaval of the late 1960s. But those closest to him knew the song traced back to that November night in 1963, when a young president's death had awakened Elvis's own sense of social responsibility. The night Priscilla first saw Elvis cry became a turning point, not just in their relationship, but in Elvis's understanding of himself and his role in the world. She had seen behind the carefully constructed image of strength and invincibility to discover someone who cared deeply about justice, progress, and the welfare of others. That vulnerability made her love him more, not less. It made their relationship more authentic, more grounded in reality rather than celebrity mythology. But it also revealed the burden that Elvis carried, the weight of knowing that his influence came with responsibility, that his platform could be used for healing or harm, that his choices mattered to people far beyond his immediate circle. The tears Elvis shed for John F. Kennedy were tears for lost hope, for shattered dreams, for a future that suddenly seemed uncertain and dangerous. But they were also tears that cleared his vision, that helped him see more clearly what he wanted to do with his life and his gifts. Priscilla often said later that the JFK assassination was when Elvis transformed from an entertainer into an artist, from someone who sang for fame into someone who sang for purpose. The man who emerged from that weekend of grief was more complex, more thoughtful, more aware of his power to influence hearts and minds. He was also more vulnerable, more willing to show emotion, more connected to the pain and hope of ordinary people. November 22, 1963 was the day America lost its innocence about violence, politics, and the fragility of democracy. For Elvis Presley, it was the day he discovered that being strong enough to cry might be the most important strength of all. The tears Priscilla witnessed that night weren't a sign of weakness. They were proof that beneath the rhinestone jumpsuits and Vegas lights lived a man who understood that the greatest performances happen when we open our hearts to the pain of the world and find ways to transform that pain into something healing. Sometimes the most powerful thing a strong person can do is weep for what the world has lost, then get up and work to build something better from the ruins.